The neon sign above the Harmon Square supermarket had been half dead for 2 years. The H was gone, completely swallowed by whatever electrical failure nobody had bothered to fix. The S flickered every 4 seconds in a rhythm that felt almost biological, like a pulse too weak to sustain itself, but too stubborn to quit. The parking lot beneath it was cracked asphalt and old oil stains, and the kind of yellow light that made everyone look a little sick, a little hollowed out, like they were all passing through something they had not agreed to. It was a Tuesday evening in October, and the temperature had dropped 11 degrees since noon. The wind came in off the flat Ohio farmland with nothing to stop it. No hills worth mentioning, no tree line dense enough to slow it down. Just open cold that found every gap in your collar and pressed into the back of your neck like a hand that would not move. The town of Carver Falls had a population of just under 14,000 people. It had a chamber of commerce and a high school football team with a decent record and a banner on Main Street that read Community Strong in navy blue and gold. It had a neighborhood watch program that had been active for 6 years, and a Facebook group for local announcements, and a volunteer fire department that held a pancake breakfast every third Saturday of the month. It had all the visible machinery of a place that looked after its own. Gracie Monroe was 6 years old, and she had been sitting alone on the third step of the concrete entrance staircase for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Her pink jacket was pulled tight across her chest with both small hands gripping the front of it. Her knees were drawn up to her chin. Her sneakers were white with a small cartoon rabbit stitched onto each ankle, and they were soaked through from sitting in the thin puddle that had collected on the second step, where the concrete had sunk slightly over the years and cupped the rain like a shallow bowl. She had a small purple backpack, the kind kindergartners carry, with a clip buckle across the chest that kids her age always forgot to use. The buckle was unclipped. The backpack had slid to one side and dangled off her left shoulder like it had simply given up trying to stay in place. She was not crying anymore. She had been. Her face still held the tight, pale, wrecked look of a child who had cried long enough to run out of it. The kind of face that comes after the body has spent everything it had on grief and is now operating in the quieter country on the other side of it. Her eyes were red and slightly glassy, and she was staring at the parking lot entrance with the fixed attention of someone waiting for something that was taking too long to come and who had not yet allowed herself to stop waiting. The first person to walk past her had been a heavy-set man in a Carhartt jacket carrying a case of bottled water. He had looked at her, looked away, kept walking. Maybe he assumed someone was coming. Maybe he told himself it was not his business. Maybe the weight of the water case made it easier to keep moving. Whatever the reason, he was gone before the automatic doors even finished closing behind him. The second was a woman in yoga pants talking into a wireless earbud. She had glanced at Gracie mid-sentence, faltered for just a moment, a brief fracture in her conversation, and then kept talking and walked through the entrance without breaking stride. She came back out 9 minutes later with a small paper bag and walked directly to her car without looking at the steps again. Whatever she had faltered over, she had resolved it in the time between going in and coming out. And the resolution was apparently that it was not her concern. There had been others, a couple arguing quietly who did not notice her at all, absorbed in whatever private friction had followed them into the parking lot. An elderly man who moved slowly enough that he seemed to see her, who paused for a moment with something complicated on his face, but then looked away with an expression that might have been exhaustion or might have been something he did not want to examine too closely, and continued toward the sliding doors. A woman in hospital scrubs who stopped, looked like she was going to say something, checked her phone, and went inside without saying it. Nobody stopped. Nobody crouched down. Nobody said, "Hey, are you okay? Where's your mom? Do you need help?" Carver Falls had a population of just under 14,000 people, and it had all the visible machinery of a place that looked after its own, and a 6-year-old girl had been sitting alone on a cold concrete step for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and the machinery had not engaged. That mattered. It would matter more before the night was finished. 2 hours and 40 minutes. Then the sound came. It did not build gradually. It did not arrive politely. It came fully formed from somewhere down Route 9, a low rolling thunder that Gracie felt in her chest before she heard it clearly, the deep synchronized percussion of multiple large engines running at highway speed and then decelerating as they turned off the state route into the parking lot approach. She lifted her head for the first time in a long while, lifting it from the position her chin had been resting on her knees, lifting it the way a person lifts their head when something in the air has changed and the body registers it before the mind catches up. 7 motorcycles came through the entrance in a loose formation, headlights cutting yellow paths through the parking lot dark. They were big machines, full touring Harleys, in 2 custom builds with exhaust pipes that ran high and wide, and they moved with a specific kind of unhurried authority, the way things move when they do not need to perform speed, because the weight alone makes the point. The engines dropped to idle as the bikes spread into a section of the lot near the entrance, and the sound became a low collective rumble before one by one the engines cut. Silence pressed in around the edges. 7 men climbed off their bikes. They were not small men. Most of them were not young men. They wore leather vests over heavy jackets, road-worn and patched, the leather cracked at the elbows and darkened in ways that spoke of years rather than months. Several had faces that carried the specific density of men who had been through things they did not discuss in certain company. Eyes that moved across a space before the rest of the face did. Scars that had their own stories and kept them. The kind of men that a town like Carver Falls had complicated feelings about. The kind of feelings that usually said more about the town than about the men. The man who had been at the front of the formation was the last to fully stand from his bike. His name was Wade Callahan. He was 47 years old, which meant nothing until you looked at him closely, at which point it meant everything. He was built like someone who had been strung young and had chosen to remain that way through deliberate effort rather than vanity. Broad across the shoulders with the kind of neck that comes from military service and years of hauling gear in places where the ground was never flat and the weather was never cooperative. His hair was dark with heavy gray at the temples, worn close cut in a way that had started as regulation and become habit. His face had a prominent jaw and deep-set eyes the color of slate, in a low light not quite gray, not quite blue. Something in between that made people uncertain what they were seeing when they first looked. The kind of eyes that registered as one thing from a distance and another thing up close. There was a scar along his left jawline. Not dramatic, not the kind you invented elaborate stories about when you saw it across a room. Just there the way old things are, they're quiet and permanent. A note someone had written a long time ago and never erased. He had gotten it in a place he did not talk about among people he no longer saw, and it had been there long enough that he sometimes forgot it existed until he caught it in a mirror or noticed someone else noticing it. He wore a president's patch on his vest. The club was called the Iron Hollow Riders, and they were based out of Columbus. If you had asked anyone in Carver Falls about them before this particular Tuesday evening, you would have gotten a range of responses that said considerably more about the people responding than about the men themselves. What was true was what could be seen: 7 men mid-30s to early 50s who had ridden together long enough that they moved with a shared vocabulary of motion, knowing where the others were without having to look, reading the shape of a situation before anyone called it. Wade was scanning the lot as he walked toward the store entrance. Not paranoid scanning, not the twitchy awareness of someone who expects trouble. Just the habitual awareness of a man trained to know what surrounded him, trained long ago, and in a specific kind of place, who had never fully lost that training, even in a supermarket parking lot on a quiet Tuesday in October in a small Ohio town. He saw Gracie. He stopped, not slowed, not hesitated. Stopped completely, full stop, mid-stride, the way a man stops when something has registered in the part of his brain that processes information faster than consciousness can follow. The man to his left, Flint Carver, 38 years old, and the club's vice president, noticed half a second later and stopped too, following the line of Wade's eyes across the parking lot to the concrete steps. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The child on the steps had noticed them. She was watching with the particular stillness of a small animal that has decided freezing is the safest response to an unknown threat. Her backpack had slid further down her arm in the time she had been watching them. Her hands were pressed flat against the concrete step on either side of her hips, the posture of a child who has been bracing herself against something for a long time. Wade handed his helmet to Flint without looking at him. He walked to the steps alone. He did not approach fast. He gave her distance, came to the bottom step, and crouched down so that his eye level dropped below hers. An instinct he had probably never consciously examined, but had been practicing in one form or another since Afghanistan, where the geometry of making yourself smaller in the presence of someone frightened had been survival knowledge for everyone in the theater, where you learned early that the most dangerous thing you could do in the presence of fear was to make yourself larger. He rested his forearms on his knees. He was not touching anything. He was just down there looking up at her instead of down at her, giving her the higher ground. The cold wind moved between them. It found the gaps in his jacket, and it found the gaps in hers. "You okay, kid?" he said. His voice was low, not performed softness, not the exaggerated gentleness of a man performing gentleness for an audience. Just low the way a voice goes when something serious is being acknowledged without being dramatized, when the situation itself does the communicating and the voice just needs to not interfere. Gracie looked at him for a long moment. Her lower lip was doing something complicated, the way lips do when a person is deciding whether to trust the next thing they are about to say to someone they have never seen before. "My mom went in," she said. "She didn't come back." Wade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Not from impatience, not from anything that had to do with her. From something else, some recognition that settled in behind his eyes and did not show on his face in any way that could be named. The recognition of a man who has walked into situations with a particular shape many times before and knows that shape on contact. "How long ago?" he asked. Gracie looked at the parking lot entrance. She did not have a watch. She did not know how to read a clock yet with any reliability. "A long time," she said. Behind Wade, Flint had moved a few steps closer and was listening without approaching, giving the conversation its space. A heavier man with a gray beard cut close and wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on his nose, who went by Hatcha Briggs, had stopped near the bottom of the steps and was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, in the patient way of a man who has waited in worse places than a supermarket parking lot. His real name was Harlan, but nobody had called him that in 20 years. He looked like a mechanic who read too much and had the eyes of someone who had cataloged most categories of human situation and could place them without making a production of it. The others were pausing at the edge of the lot, reading the shape of things without being told what they were looking at. "What's your name?" Wade asked. "Gracie." "I'm Wade." He did not offer a hand, just the name the way you offer a name to an equal when the situation does not have room for formality. "Your mom shop here a lot." Gracie nodded slowly. "Every Tuesday. She gets the chicken." She paused, searching for the specific word. "The one in the plastic." "The rotisserie." She nodded again, more certain now, the vocabulary having reconnected something familiar. Some small anchor to the ordinary Tuesday this was supposed to have been. "Okay," Wade said. "We're going to find her. You want to wait right here while we go look inside, or you want to come with us?" He did not tell her what was going to happen. Did not assume, did not reach for her or move to pick her up. He asked, and he waited, and he let the question be what it was. Gracie considered this with the gravity of a child who had been thinking like a small adult for the better part of 3 hours. She had already done the calculation of waiting, already lived through nearly 3 hours of it, and the calculation had not produced her mother. "Come with," she said. Wade stood. He held his hand out, palm up, fingers slightly curled, not reaching for her, just there available, something she could take or not take. Gracie looked at it for a second, then she put her small hand in it. They went through the sliding doors together. The store was bright in the particular assaulting way of supermarkets' fluorescent tubes running the full length of the ceiling, every aisle lit with the same flat, shadowless intensity that erased depth and made the space feel simultaneously vast and airless. A pop song from several years ago ran on the overhead speakers at a volume calibrated to be heard but not noticed. The specific volume of background sound designed to occupy just enough of your attention that you stop thinking about how long you have been there. The smell was produce and cold air and the warm exhaust from the deli ovens at the back. The bikers spread loosely through the entrance area without being told how. Hatch took up a position near the snack aisle in the easy, undemonstrative way of a man who has stood post before and knows how to do it without looking like he is. Two others stationed themselves at the far end of the entrance area. The rest moved toward the store interior with the unhurried efficiency of people who have been doing things together long enough that coordination does not require conversation. Wade walked Gracie toward the customer service desk. A woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head was finishing a transaction with a customer who had strong feelings about a coupon. She looked up when Wade and Gracie reached the counter and did the thing people often did, When they first looked at Wade, the slight widening of the eyes, the rapid recalibration of the situation she was now in. He was large. He was wearing a cut with patches that said specific things to people who knew how to read them. He was holding the hand of a small child who looked like she had been crying for a long time. "There are problems," she said. The voice of a woman who had called security before and was assessing whether this was a situation for that. "Little girl's been outside alone for a while," Wade said. "Her mother came in here and didn't come back. We need to find her." "How long has she been outside?" "Close to 3 hours. The woman looked at Gracie with an expression that the coupon dispute had not produced in her. Something shifted in her face, some rearrangement of priorities. "Let me get the manager." The manager, who arrived 3 minutes later, was a man named Greg Whitmore, recently promoted to assistant manager, not yet entirely certain how to inhabit the confidence the title was supposed to carry. He was wearing a dress shirt with the store logo embroidered on the breast pocket and a tie that had been loosened at some point during the evening and not retightened. He looked at Wade the way men of a certain type looked at Wade when they were trying to decide if they were in danger, running the assessment in real time and not being subtle about it. "I understand there's a missing person situation," Greg said. "Child's mother came in approximately 3 hours ago," Wade said. "Hasn't come out. Girl's been sitting outside alone the whole time." He paused. "We'd like to see your security footage." Greg blinked. "I'm sorry, that's not really something we can just provide to—" "Greg!" Wade's voice had not changed volume. Nothing about the delivery was louder or harder, but something had shifted in it, some quality that communicated clearly, "We can do this the way that wastes time, or the other way. The first way costs this child more minutes and her mother more minutes and gets us all to the same place eventually anyway. There's a little girl right here. Her mother is somewhere in this building, or was. Every minute we spend on policy discussions is a minute her mother doesn't have." Greg looked at Gracie. Gracie looked at Greg with her red-rimmed eyes and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. She had been saying it for 2 hours and 40 minutes without anyone stopping long enough to hear it. Greg made the decision that the correct response was cooperation and said, "Follow me." The security office was a small room behind the customer service area with 2 monitors displaying split feeds from 12 cameras covering the entrance, each main aisle, the deli counter, the stockroom entrance, and the rear exterior. The system recorded on a 48-hour loop and stored everything locally on a drive that looked like it had not been replaced since the system was installed. By the time they were assembled in the small room, Ghost had materialized in the doorway. His name was Eli Cross, though the men he rode with had called him Ghost for 11 years, a name he had acquired before the club in a previous life, that he referenced obliquely and rarely, usually with 2 words prior, service followed by a shift in subject. He was 39 and lean in the way of someone whose metabolism had been set to operational speed years ago and had never fully reset. He carried a compact tablet in a worn case and moved through spaces as though he had already mapped them before he arrived, which in most situations was not far from the truth. Ghost looked at the monitors and said, "Pull the rear exterior. Last 3 hours." Greg pulled it. The footage was grainy in the way of systems installed as a security gesture rather than a real security investment. The resolution good enough to see shapes and in motion, but not good enough to read a license plate without help. The rear exit of the Harmon Square supermarket opened onto a narrow service alley that ran along the back of the building. Delivery bays, dumpsters, the infrastructure of retail that existed specifically to be invisible to anyone who was not required to interact with it. The alley was lit by a single overhead fixture that left deep shadow at both ends. They watched in silence. At 4:41 in the afternoon, a woman appeared in the frame. She had come through the rear exit door, the one marked employees, only the kind that locked from the outside so customers could not access it from the alley. She was slight, wearing a dark coat and carrying a canvas shopping bag that she had brought with her from the front of the store. She had the hurried look of someone who had just been told something and was still processing it, moving with a direction she had not quite decided on. Behind her, 2 men emerged from the door almost immediately after. They were not store employees. One wore a dark jacket, one wore a gray hoodie. They moved the way men move when they are escorting rather than accompanying, each positioned at a slightly different angle relative to the woman framing her between them in a way that appeared casual and was not. One of them reached out and put a hand on the woman's arm as she moved toward the alley exit. She pulled her arm back. He put his hand back on her arm. The second man stepped to her other side. The woman stopped walking. She turned slightly and said something. Whatever she said, the man in the dark jacket responded, and his body language was the body language of a conversation that only one party considered optional. They walked her toward the alley exit. A car was waiting there, a dark blue four-door engine running. The timestamp read 4:44. 3 minutes. From rear exit door to the car pulling away. Nobody spoke in the security office for a moment after the car disappeared from the frame. Gracie had been sitting outside on those front steps for 2 hours and 49 minutes when the Iron Hollow riders pulled into the parking lot. This was now a different kind of situation than a mother who had lost track of time in the grocery store. Wade was the first to move. He looked at Ghost and something passed between them that was not a conversation but was a complete communication. Ghost was already pulling out the tablet. Plate on the car, Wade said. Camera angles partial from the alley feed, Ghost said. He opened a second window and began typing with a speed that suggested familiarity with the process. The alley exit lets out onto the service road behind the building which connects to Route 9. There's a traffic camera at the Route 9 and Kellerman Road intersection. State traffic management feed. Let me pull the timestamp window. He worked. Everyone else waited. Greg Whitmore stood near the door with the expression of a man whose Tuesday evening had become something significantly larger than he had agreed to when he had accepted the assistant manager position, and who was now trying to determine exactly what his responsibilities were in a situation for which his training had not prepared him. I think we should call the police, Greg said carefully. Yes, Wade said, you should do that. He said it without irony. He meant it completely. The police needed to know. They needed to be involved, but there was something in the way he said it that made clear he was not planning to wait for their arrival to start working the problem. Flint appeared in his doorway. Called Harmon County non-emergency already. Dispatch says unit response is 40 to 50 minutes minimum. Night shift is running short. Wade looked at Gracie. She was standing beside him, still holding his hand, and she was looking at the screen where her mother had just been walked to a car by two men she did not know. Her face had changed from what it had been on the steps outside. Outside, she had been frightened and exhausted, a child running on the last reserves of waiting. Now she was something else, something that did not have a word in a 6-year-old's vocabulary, but that the adults in the room recognized because they had seen it before in other faces, in older faces, in the faces of people who had just been handed information they were not ready to receive. She was understanding something she was not old enough to understand. Hey, Wade said. He said it quietly for her alone. Gracie looked up at him. We're going to find her. He did not add qualifiers. He did not say we'll try or we'll do our best or we'll see what we can do. He said we're going to find her with the voice of a man who had made promises in places far worse than this and had not broken them, and who understood that the difference between a promise and an intention was everything. A man named Kenny Walsh, one of the overnight stock crew who had been listening from just outside the security office doorway with his arms crossed and the look of someone deciding whether to involve himself, knocked on the doorframe. He was around 40 years old, had worked the back of this store for 9 years, and had the look of someone who had been paying attention to things other people missed for most of those 9 years. He said those two men had been in the store before, 3 times this month, always around the same time in the afternoon. Always left through the back exit with the assistant manager, the other one, not Greg. Which assistant manager, Flint said. Terry Slade, Kenny said. He left at 4 today. Said he had a thing. A pause. He left maybe 5 minutes after those two came in through the front. The cold came through the walls of the security office in a way that had nothing to do with the October temperature outside. Ghost had the traffic camera footage now. The dark blue Dodge Charger had turned right out of the service alley and merged onto Route 9 heading east. He ran the plate from the intersection camera image where the rear of the vehicle was fully visible in the frame. The registration came back to a company, not a person. A limited liability company called Pinnacle Capital Solutions registered in Franklin County, Ohio. Registered agent Victor Crane. Ghost opened a second window without pausing. Ohio's public court docket, Harmon County. He navigated through it with the efficiency of someone who had done this before in other contexts and other lives and had never forgotten how. He found what he was looking for inside 2 minutes. A small claims filing from the previous year. Pinnacle Capital Solutions listed as plaintiff against a woman named Rachel Monroe. Amount in dispute $11,200. Case continued twice, then settled. Loan she couldn't pay back, Flint said from around the corner, arriving now into the doorway in full. Or couldn't pay because the terms were designed so she couldn't, Ghost said. He scrolled. The case settled, which means she paid them something or agreed to something or was pressured to agree to something. He looked up from the tablet. And now they want more. $62,000 worth of more, Wade said quietly. Flint looked at him. How do you know the amount? I don't yet, Wade said, but I will. Ghost said, Kellerman Industrial Park, 8 miles east on Route 9. Satellite shows a cluster of warehouses on the far end of the property. Most have been vacant since the mid-2000s. He turned the tablet screen. There's a recent image from a mapping vehicle that captured this area. One of the warehouse lots has a new padlock on the access gate. New chain. The access road shows overgrowth on the shoulders and no tire track, evidence of regular traffic. But the gate hardware looks like it was purchased recently. Wade stood. He looked at the tablet. He looked at Flint and at Ghost. He looked toward the front entrance of the store where the rest of the men were positioned. Then he looked at Gracie. You're going to stay here with Hatch, he said, and 2 of our guys. Hatch is going to find you something to eat. The police are coming, and when they get here, you're going to tell them your name and your mom's name and what you told us. Okay. Gracie looked at him. Are you going to find my mom? Wade held her gaze steadily. Yeah, he said, that's where we're going. Gracie looked at him for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes. The eyes of a child who had been watching the world decide not to help her for nearly 3 hours, and who had not yet decided how much to trust the thing that felt like an exception. Then she looked at Hatch. Hatch pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose with one finger and said without any particular ceremony, I saw they have goldfish crackers in aisle 4, the ones in the individual bags. Those are good, Gracie said quietly. There was no smile in it, but something in her voice had changed by a few degrees the way the air changes just before weather shifts. Yeah, Hatch said, they are? Outside, Wade moved through the sliding doors into the cold. The parking lot wine found the gap at his collar immediately. He zipped the jacket and stood at the edge of the lot for a moment, looking at the row of bikes' chrome, catching the flickering light of the half-dead sign, and then at his men who were already moving toward their machines without being called. Flint pulled up alongside him. Stone was there, Marcus Webb, 6'1" and 240 pounds of former correctional officer who moved through spaces with the unhurried competence of a man who had spent 11 years on overnight shifts in an enclosed facility and had learned that stillness was its own kind of authority. Doc was slightly apart from the others, already checking the medical kit secured to his saddlebag, with the quiet efficiency of a man who never needed to be reminded that it might be needed. Shadow, whose real name was Ray Holden, was simply at the edge of the group when Wade looked for him, the way he was always simply there when you looked without any discernible point of arrival. Ghost emerged from the store behind Wade, tablet in hand still working. Nobody needed a briefing. They had all been inside. They had all seen the screen. 6 of us, Wade said. Ghost navigates. Doc rides drag monitors the police frequency. He looked at each of them in the specific way he had when he meant for them to understand he was looking at each of them individually, not the group. We go in quiet. We don't know what we're riding into. I want eyes before anyone moves. He looked at Shadow, which means you earn your name. Shadow said nothing, but something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Kellerman Industrial, Ghost said, 8.4 miles, 12 minutes at legal speed. We're not speeding, Wade said. He put his helmet on. The bikes came to life, one by one, each engine adding its voice to the accumulated low thunder until all 6 were running. The sound in the parking lot was the sound of something that had made up its mind. Wade looked back through the glass of the entrance. He could see the bright interior, the fluorescent ceiling, the aisles stretching back into the store. He could see Hatch standing in an aisle with a small figure beside him. He could see, even at this distance, the purple backpack still hanging off one shoulder. He looked away. He pulled out of the lot onto Route 9 East, and the others fell in behind him, and the October dark swallowed them. 6 machines and 6 riders moving through cold farmland toward a warehouse at the edge of town, following a chain of information that ended at a woman who had been walked out of a grocery store by 2 men who were not giving her a choice. The engines ran low in the cold air. Chrome caught the moonlight in pieces and gave it back. Nobody spoke. A thin fog had begun forming over the flat fields, rising from the harvested ground in slow, pale curtains that the headlights pressed through without quite clearing. The tunnels of illuminated vapor closed again immediately behind each machine, indifferent to the passage. The road stretched east through the dark, with nothing on either side worth noting. Just the flatness of Ohio in October, and the cold and the occasional distant light of a farmhouse set far enough back from the highway to seem like it belonged to a different world entirely. 8 miles, 12 minutes. In the space behind his sternum, where the weight lived, the weight that had accumulated there over a lifetime of wrong places and right decisions and wrong decisions and people he had not reached in time and people he had, Wade felt something compress and go still. He had been here before. Not this road, not this town, but this feeling, the feeling of riding towards something that could not be undone, of being the thing standing between someone and the worst version of tonight. He had been here enough times to know its exact shape. What he did not know yet was what was waiting on the other side of that gate. What he did not know was that the warehouse held more than one secret. What he did not know, riding through the October fog on Route 9 East toward the Kellerman Industrial Park, was that one of the vehicles parked in front of that warehouse belonged to someone with a badge. And what he could not have known, because no one had told him yet, was that before this night was over, he would come face to face with a name he had spent 11 years believing belonged to the dead. The engines ran. The fog rose around them on both sides of the highway. 12 minutes stood between the Iron Hollow riders and everything that was about to happen next. The specific texture of how a community could look like care and function like indifference was something Wade Callahan had encountered before in other towns, not so different from Carver Falls. Places with banners and civic organizations and neighborhood watch programs and all the trappings of collective concern, and yet in the particular moments when concern was most needed, it somehow failed to translate into action. He had thought about this over the years, the distance between the performance of community and the practice of it, and he had never arrived at a satisfying explanation. Maybe it was the anonymity of public spaces, the diffusion of responsibility that happens when everyone assumes someone else will act. Maybe it was the low-grade fear that attaches itself to problems that are not yours, the calculation of cost and inconvenience that runs in the background, even in people who would describe themselves as good. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe people just wanted to get their groceries and go home, and the world outside their immediate circle was too large and too demanding to engage with every time it presented itself in the form of a child sitting on a step. Whatever the reason, 2 hours and 40 minutes had passed. Wade crouched at the bottom of those steps and looked up at Gracie Monroe and understood something about the specific kind of alone she had been in. Not just physically alone, though she had been that, but alone in the way that happens when a person realizes that the world they believed would respond to them in a moment of need has simply declined to do so. That kind of alone leaves a mark that physical company cannot immediately erase. He had seen it in other faces and older faces, in people who had been left in worse places than a cold supermarket step, the mark of having called out and heard no answer coming back. He did not rush her. He did not reach for her. He crouched at the bottom of those steps in the cold and waited for her to decide, and when she decided, she put her small hand in his, and they went through the sliding doors together, and he kept her hand in his the entire time they were inside the store, through the brightness in the fluorescent ceiling and the pop song on the speakers, through the conversation with the manager and the walk to the security office and the footage and all of it. He kept her hand in his because it was the only concrete thing he could offer her in those minutes. A hand that did not let go, which was the opposite of what the world had been offering her for the last several hours. Hatch Briggs watched all of this from his position near the snack aisle with the quiet attention of a man who notices things and rarely says so. He had been riding with Wade Callahan for 11 years. He had seen him in situations of every category, high pressure and low dangerous and merely difficult, the kind where the right response was obvious and the kind where it wasn't. He had seen him make decisions, and he had seen him make mistakes, and he had seen him make good with those mistakes with the same methodical honesty he brought to everything else. What he was watching now was something slightly different from all of that, something quieter. He watched Wade Callahan walk through the store holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl, and something in the specific way he was doing it, the care of it, the unhurriedness of it, in a situation that clearly demanded speed, told Hatch something about the man that 11 years had not told him in quite this particular way. He kept this observation to himself. That was also the thing about Hatch. Inside the security office, Gracie stood beside Wade and watched the footage on the monitor with the specific stillness of a child who has decided that what is on the screen is important enough to look at directly and not look away from. She watched her mother appear at the rear exit. She watched the two men come through the door behind her. She watched her mother pull her arm away and have her arm taken back. She watched all of it without moving and without making a sound. When the car disappeared from the frame, she said, "Is my mom okay?" Wade looked at her. "We don't know yet," he said. "That's what we're going to find out." She considered this. "But you're going to look." "Yes," he said. "We're going to look." "Okay," she said. And she nodded once the nod of someone processing information and filing it under things that are being handled, a nod that in a 6-year-old was simultaneously heartbreaking and remarkable in its composure. Ghost was already working. The plate off the traffic camera at Route 9 in Kellerman, the company registration in Franklin County, the name Victor Crane, the court filing from the previous year, Pinnacle Capital Solutions versus Rachel Monroe, $11,200. The geography of Kellerman Industrial Park, 8 miles east, the satellite image, the new padlock on the gate that was bright where everything else was corroded. Each piece of information arrived in sequence, and each one narrowed the picture and sharpened it. That was the thing about Ghost. He moved through information the way Shadow moved through physical spaces, quietly and with a specific efficiency that did not announce itself. Kenny Walsh had been the one to fill in the missing piece about Terry Slade. Kenny Walsh, who had been working the overnight stock crew at this store for 9 years, and who had the particular knowledge that accrues to people who pay attention to routines in enclosed spaces. The two men who had been in the store before, always at the same time, always leaving through the back exit with the assistant manager who was conveniently absent tonight, who had left 5 minutes after the two men arrived, who had called it a family thing. There was a specific cold that came into the security office after Kenny Walsh said what he said. It had nothing to do with the October temperature outside. Wade looked at Gracie. She had been listening to all of it with the expression of a child who was understanding more than was supposed to be understandable, absorbing more than a 6-year-old should have been asked to absorb in a single evening. On the drive here, he said, "Did your mom seem worried about anything?" Gracie thought about it with her whole face. "She was on the phone," she said. "In the car. She was talking quiet. I asked what she was saying, and she said it was grown-up stuff." She paused. She looked scared, but she was pretending she wasn't. The last sentence hit the room differently than the others, not because it contained new information, but because of the precision of it. A 6-year-old child watching her mother perform calm over fear during a car ride to the grocery store, recognizing it for what it was, and choosing to let her mother have the performance rather than call it into question. That was not a 6-year-old thing to understand. That was something older, something that had been learned the hard way. Flint, in the doorway, looked at the floor. Hatch turned to look at a point on the wall. Wade held it on his face for as long as it required, which was a few seconds, and then he straightened and looked at Ghost and said 8.4 miles, and Ghost said 12 minutes at legal speed, and Wade said we're not speeding, and that was all that needed to be said. The part about leaving Gracie with Hatch was harder than the rest of it. She did not cry. She did not plead. She looked at him with those dark, serious eyes and asked if he was going to find her mom, and he said, "Yeah, that's where we're going." And something in the way she received that answer told him she had weighed it and decided it was something she could trust. He had meant it to be trustworthy. He had said it the way he said things when he meant them completely. Not as a comfort and not as a performance, as a fact about what he was going to do. Hatch provided the thing about the crackers in aisle 4, and Gracie said, "Those are good." And Hatch said, "Yeah, they are." And that was a small human exchange in the middle of a large, terrible evening. And it was also enough right then, which was the thing about small human exchanges. They were often enough right in the moment when they happened. The fog had thickened in the miles between the supermarket and the Kellerman Industrial Park. It came up from the ground itself rather than drifting in from the fields, rising through the cracked asphalt and the dead weeds along the road, shoulder in thin tendrils that joined and thickened as the temperature continued its slow fall. The headlights of the bikes pressed forward into it, but did not defeat it. And the darkness on either side of the beams was absolute, in the way that flat Ohio countryside at night is absolute, not the darkness of depth, but the darkness of uninterrupted absence. The dark of a place where there is simply nothing to catch the light and throw it back. Wade felt the temperature in his knuckles despite the gloves, a deep, specific cold that found the joints and settled in. He had ridden in worse. But there was a particular quality to Ohio cold in October that was less about the number on a thermometer and more about the flatness, the way the cold had nowhere to be except everywhere, spreading itself thin and total across the open ground with nothing to interrupt it. The industrial park appeared first as a change in the silhouette of the horizon. Long, low structures with flat roof lines, a rusted water tower, the bones of buildings that had been constructed when something was happening in this place and had been maintained at the minimum threshold required to call them still standing once the something stopped happening. No lights in the windows, no movement. The particular stillness of structures that had outlived their purpose and had not yet been given permission to fall. Ghost's voice came through the earpiece, running a simple group channel, enough for communication. Access road is the second left past the Kellerman sign. Gate's another 200 yards in. Wade clicked once, acknowledged. He took the left and felt the road quality change immediately beneath the tires. Rougher, less maintained, the asphalt giving way to something that was more in tension than surface, cracked and heaved, and filled with gravel in sections where the worst damage had been addressed but never properly repaired. The bike slowed. At this speed, in this dark on this road, 6 points of light were moving through a place that did not want to be found. The gate was where Ghost had said it would be. Chain link, maybe 8 feet high. A new padlock that caught the headlights differently than the rest of the gate, brighter, less corroded, the shine of something recently purchased. On the other side, the access road continued 30 yards before reaching the first warehouse building. No lights visible in the structure itself, but around the far corner, just barely enough to register as a difference in the darkness, the faint suggestion of light from somewhere behind the building. And 2 vehicles were parked inside the gate, both visible through the chain link. A dark blue Dodge Charger, which was expected, and a white Ford F250 with a light bar mounted on the cab roof. Wade brought his bike to a stop 10 yards from the gate and cut the engine. The others came in behind him and stopped, and cut theirs in sequence. The sudden silence was the silence of a road that had never been designed for this kind of quiet. Cracked asphalt and dead weeds, and the thin sound of fog moving through things that were not themselves moving. Nobody said anything for a moment. They all looked at the F-250. Flint came up alongside Wade, close enough to speak without the earpiece, his voice below a breath. "That's a county vehicle. Sheriff's Department runs the same package on their F-Series. Light bar configuration, the antenna placement." A pause. "That's a county truck, Wade." "I can see that." Shadow was at Wade's other side. He had not been there a moment before and was there now without anyone having tracked his arrival, which was the particular thing about Shadow. He was looking at the F250 with narrowed eyes. "Doesn't mean it's dirty," he said. "Could be someone called it in already. Could be a deputy got here first." "Could be," Wade said. "But if a deputy was responding to a call, there'd be lights and the vehicle would be positioned out front, not parked inside a locked gate." He looked at Flint. "You reached dispatch through the scanner." Doc, riding drag and monitoring the county frequency, had already sent the answer through the earpiece. No active calls to this location in the last 6 hours. Nothing dispatched to Kellerman Industrial tonight. The county was quiet. Whatever was happening here was not sanctioned by the county tonight. "So whoever's in there with that vehicle," Flint said quietly, "they're here because they chose to be here." Wade sat with that for 4 seconds. He was very still in the way he got still when the calculations were running fastest and the exterior was the calmest. The others had learned to read this over years of riding together. When Wade went still and quiet, the situation had upgraded in a direction that required more thought and less speed. "Ghost," he said, touching the earpiece. "Yeah, the vehicle, run it." "How uncomfortable is this going to make someone find out whose truck is parked inside a locked gate in a vacant industrial lot next to a car connected to the disappearance of a woman?" Silence on the line, then the sound of keys. While Ghost worked, Wade studied the gate. Chain-link surface-mounted hinges on the swing, side the upright setting concrete that had heaved slightly from frost cycles. The hinges were older than the padlock. That mattered. Shadow was already moving. He went to the fence line 20 feet to the left of the gate and worked along it with unhurried precision until he found the section where the bottom rail had pulled slightly from its anchor. A gap of perhaps 4 inches between the chain link and the ground. He crouched, put both hands on the fence fabric, and pulled steadily. The corroded rail gave with a low groan, and the gap became 8 inches, then a foot. Shadow went flat, and through it like water, finding a crack, stood on the other side, brushed gravel from his jacket, and moved toward the gate from the inside with no apparent hurry. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, the gate swung inward from the hinge side. He had not touched the lock. Wade walked his bike through. The others did the same. 6 men walking 6 motorcycles through a gate in the dark, the only sounds the soft crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional low clink of metal. They left the bikes 20 yards inside the gate, parked in a line facing the exit, staged for availability rather than departure. Everyone understood the difference. They went the rest of the way on foot. Ghost's voice came through as they moved across the gravel. The F-250 is registered to Harmon County Sheriff's Department Unit 11, current assigned operator. A pause that carried texture, the kind of pause that contains what is coming before it arrives. Deputy Roy Sutter, 14-year veteran. No disciplinary record on public file. Wade said nothing. But Ghost continued, his voice moving into something careful. I went into the county's vendor payment records. Public technically just buried. An LLC called Ridgeline Consulting has received 3 payments from Pinnacle Capital Solutions in the last 16 months. Total amount just under $28,500. He stopped. Ridgeline Consulting is registered to a Roy D. Sutter. The fog moved around them. Nobody spoke for a moment. Stone, who had said almost nothing since they had left the supermarket, said quietly and without particular emotion, "So we have a deputy on Crane's payroll inside. We have a deputy who has been receiving payments from the man whose people took Rachel Monroe," Wade said. "What he's doing in that building tonight, we don't know yet." "We know enough," Flint said. Wade looked at him. "We know he's not here on department business," Flint said. "We know he's been on Crane's payroll. We know a woman is in that building and she's been there for 3 hours." He paused. "Wade, we know enough." The thing about Flint Carver was that before he had been a biker and before he had been the vice president of the Iron Hollow Riders, he had been in places where the calculation between knowing enough and waiting for certainty had cost people things they could not get back. He had a short fuse that was attached to a genuine protective instinct, which made it the most dangerous kind, the kind that is not purely aggression, but aggression in service of something real, which is harder to argue with than pure aggression because it comes from somewhere legitimate. Wade understood all of this. He had understood it for 9 years. He also understood that walking 6 men into a warehouse where an armed deputy was present, whatever that deputy's loyalties were, was not a situation that resolved cleanly. Not for Rachel, not for any of them. Clean entries into unclear situations were what got people killed in ways that nobody intended. "Here's what we are not going to do," Wade said. "We are not going to go through that door loud and fast and give anyone inside a reason to make a decision they cannot take back." He looked at Flint, directly holding it. "She's in there because they need something from her. They need her to sign something, which means they need her functional, which means we have time to go in correctly." Flint held the eye contact for a moment. Then he looked away. But something had shifted in the group that Wade felt without needing to see it, the specific temperature change of men who trusted him and were beginning to measure the distance between trust and disagreement. The warehouse building was long and low, loading dock infrastructure along the near side. Roll-up doors padlocked shut, dock plates rusted in place. The faint light from the road was coming from the far end where one of the roll-up doors had been replaced at some point with a standard man door. Thin light escaped from beneath it. Shadow was already at the far corner, pressed flat, looking around it at the door. He came back and held up 3 fingers, 3 people visible. Then one finger held lower, the gesture of someone seated. One person in a chair. Wade nodded. Shadow went back. Wade pointed to Doc. "Stay at depth. Be ready." Doc acknowledged. Wade pointed to Stone, the far side of the building covering other exits. Stone moved without a word, disappearing around the corner. "Stay with me," Wade said to Flint. "Always," Flint said. "Doesn't mean I agree." "You don't have to agree." Wade walked around the corner and directly to the door. No ceremony, no signal beyond his own movement. He pushed it open. The inside of the warehouse was lit by 2 work lights on stands, the portable kind, battery-powered and directional, set up to illuminate a central area while the rest of the building stayed in deep shadow. The central area was a cleared section of concrete floor roughly 20 feet across, surrounded by the debris of a long vacant industrial space. Rusted shelving, broken pallets, the skeletal remains of machinery stripped for parts years ago. In the center of the cleared area was a metal folding chair. Rachel Monroe was in it. She was 34 years old, and she had the slim build of a woman who had always been slight, and the hours in that chair had made her slighter. Her shoulders compressed forward, her hands zip-tied behind the chair's back rail. Her dark coat was still on. Her canvas shopping bag was on the floor 6 feet away, overturned its contents, scattered across the concrete. A wallet, a phone with a cracked screen, a small pink hair clip that belonged to a 6-year-old girl. A folded piece of paper with something written on it in a child's approximate handwriting. She was conscious. Her eyes came to the door the moment it opened, and what moved across her face was not relief, not yet, because she did not know who was coming through that door. The last several hours had taught her that new arrivals were not a neutral event. She looked at Wade, and Wade looked at her, and he said clearly and without drama, "Rachel Monroe, your daughter sent us." He had not planned that sentence. It arrived from somewhere below, planning from the part of a person that knows what another person needs to hear before the conscious mind catches up. And it was exactly right, because he watched it land in her face and saw the calculation change. Not safety, not yet, but the beginning of the possibility of it. There were 2 other men in the warehouse. The first stood near a folding table to Rachel's left, covered with stacked documents and a pen laid across the top. He was in his early 50s, heavy in the way of a man who had been fit once and stopped being fit but retained the structural mass. He was wearing a gray suit that had been expensive when it was purchased. He had the face of someone accustomed to rooms being arranged to his benefit, and the expression currently on that face was the expression of a man for whom this had just stopped being true. Victor Crane. Wade recognized the type without needing the research. He had known men like Crane since he was 19 years old. Men who used controlled spaces and controlled documents and the implicit threat of systems they had partially corrupted to accomplish what direct intimidation could not. Men who kept enough distance between themselves and the rough work to maintain the fiction of clean hands. The second man was in the far corner, half in shadow. He was wearing a deputy's uniform. His hand was at his hip, not on the weapon but near it. The body language of a man who had not decided yet and was keeping the option available. Deputy Roy Sutter was around Wade's age, maybe a year older. Broad through the middle, the kind of physical mass that a uniform in a department will maintain in a man who stops being careful about it. His face was doing complicated things, the face of a man whose understanding of the evening had just been fundamentally revised by the arrival of 6 men in leather cuts through a warehouse door. Flint and Ghost came through behind Wade. Ghost moved to the right wall with his tablet already open. Doc had come through last and was crossing toward Rachel with his eyes on her hands and her posture reading her the way medics read a scene before they touch anything. Crane spoke first. "This is private property," he said. His voice was steady in the way that takes effort to produce slightly compressed. "You are trespassing, and I want you out of this building immediately." Wade walked to the folding table and looked at the documents without touching them. The header of the top sheet was visible from standing height. A loan restructuring agreement, dense paragraphs, an extended signature block at the bottom. "How much?" Wade said. "I beg your pardon. How much is she signing for?" Crane's jaw shifted. "That is a private financial matter between this company and—" "How much, Victor?" The use of his first name landed differently than Crane had expected. Something moved in his eyes. From the chair, Rachel said in a voice that was quiet and hoarse and completely flat, $62,000. Wade looked at her. She was looking at the paper on the table, not at Crane, not at Wade. They said the original amount compounded. With the penalty rate and the legal fees, they said, if I didn't sign tonight, they'd file in county court and I'd lose the apartment. She paused. Gracie and I would lose the apartment. There it was. $62,000 assembled from compounding rates and buried penalties and fees, designed to be large enough to be paralyzing and small enough to remain theoretically defensible in a courtroom. A number built to break a woman sitting alone in a folding chair in a building where no one would hear her. Doc had reached Rachel and was crouching behind the chair, working at the zip ties with a small tool, his movements quiet and deliberate. Sutter said, "You need to stop." Doc did not stop. "Sir." Sutter's hand moved an inch closer to the holster. "I am a sworn officer of Harmon County, and I am ordering you to step away." She has circulation impairment in both hands, Doc said without looking up the voice of someone reading data off an instrument. This is a medical intervention. Wade turned from the table and looked at Sutter with the same quality of full, unhurried attention he had given Gracie on the steps. "You are not here on county business," he said. "You did not log this location. You drove a county vehicle to a building where a woman is being held against her will and coerced into signing a fraudulent document." He let that sit for a moment. "Whatever Victor Crane told you this was worth, I want you to think carefully about what you're doing right now and calculate whether you want to add obstruction of justice to what's already in the record." Sutter's jaw worked. "I don't know who you people are." "We're people who found a 6-year-old alone on a sidewalk," Wade said. "That's the whole story." Something moved in Sutter's face. Not remorse, not yet, but a fracture. A recognition that the shape of the evening had changed in a way he had not authorized and could not change back. Crane said, "Roy, do your job." Sutter looked at Crane, then he looked at Wade. Then he looked at the tablet in the ghost's hands, which Ghost had angled just enough to be visible, just enough for Sutter to see that keystrokes were happening, that something was being transmitted, that whatever was going to happen next was not going to be contained in this building. The zip tie came free. Rachel made a sound, just a sharp exhaled breath, as circulation returned to her hands. She brought them forward slowly and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, closing her eyes for a moment against the pain of restored blood flow. Doc put a hand on her shoulder. "Can you stand?" "Yes," she said immediately. She tried. 3 hours in a metal folding chair with your hands behind you does things to the lower back that are not visible until you ask the body to do what it was built to do. She made it upright with Doc's hand at her elbow, slightly unsteady, compensating. She looked at Wade. "Where's Gracie?" "Safe," he said. "At the supermarket. 2 of our guys are with her. She's okay." Rachel's face did something it had not been allowed to do in 3 hours. It came apart slightly at the edges, not into sobbing. She did not have the structural stability left for that, but into the expression of a woman who has been holding something at sufficient internal pressure to fracture concrete and has just been told she can set it down. She pressed both hands flat against her sternum and breathed. Crane said, "You have no legal right to—" "Victor." Something in Wade's voice had shifted just slightly, a narrowing. "Stop talking." Crane stopped. Ghost said from the right wall, "Sent." Wade looked at him. "Full package," Ghost said. "FBI Columbus Field Office. Footage from the rear camera, financial records, the Sutter payment records connecting Ridgeline Consulting to Pinnacle Capital GEP S coordinates current timestamp." He lowered the tablet. "The agent I sent it to says they have had a file open on Pinnacle Capital for 14 months. He has been waiting for something attachable." Crane's face changed. The kind of change that happens when a man's internal model of how a situation resolves is replaced without warning by a model he does not prefer. His mouth tightened. His eyes moved to Sutter. Sutter was not looking back. He was looking at the floor. That, Wade thought, was the answer to the question of what kind of man Roy Sutter was going to turn out to be in the end. Not the worst kind. The kind who had gone along for money and convenience and had not thought past the individual transactions to the sum of all of them. A man now doing that arithmetic in real time and arriving at a number he did not like. Wade picked up the full stack of documents from the folding table and rolled them lengthwise. He dropped them on the warehouse floor. Then Ghost's voice came through the earpiece, carrying something in its register that made the arithmetic stop. "Wade," the way he said it. "What?" The FBI agent in Columbus called back. Fast. A pause. "He says the Crane file isn't new to them. 14 months open, like I said, but he said something else." Another pause longer. "He said when I mentioned your name, your actual name, he went quiet. And then he asked me if you knew that the undercover agent embedded in Crane's operation for the last 8 months is someone you know." The warehouse was very still. He said the agent's name is Cole Callahan. The work lights burned in the center of the warehouse. The shadows held at the edges. Rachel stood with Doc's hand at her elbow. Crane stood at the empty table. Sutter stood against the far wall. Wade did not move. "Cole Callahan," he said. Not a question. Just the name said aloud in a warehouse in Ohio at nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night in October. A name he had not said in 11 years. A name he had believed for 11 years belonged to someone who was no longer alive to answer to it. "Your brother," Ghost said quietly. "I was told he was dead." "I know. 11 years ago, I was told he was dead. Flint was very still across the room, looking at Wade with the expression of a man recalibrating multiple things simultaneously and taking care to let the recalibration happen before he said anything about it. Ghost said, "The agent says Cole's cover identity is a man named Cole Briggs. He has been inside Crane's inner circle for 8 months. The FBI has been building toward a federal arrest of Crane for 6 months. They were close." He paused. Cole stopped responding 22 minutes ago. Last confirmed contact was at 10:04. At 10:17, Crane activated what the agent is calling a contingency protocol. Wade said, "What does that mean?" "It means when the warehouse situation collapsed, Crane signaled that his operation was compromised. Anyone inside the inner circle who knows Tubayim becomes a variable he wants to close before federal assets arrive. Cole Briggs has been inside that circle for 8 months. He knows faces, accounts, locations, structures. From Crane's perspective, Cole Briggs becomes the most urgent variable to close. Where would Crane take him? Ghost had already been looking. He turned the tablet screen. Crane owns property in Harmon County under 3 corporate structures. Most of it is commercial. But there is one residential property, a lake house on Crane Lake Road registered to a family trust. Private access, 17 acres. No neighboring properties within a quarter mile. He looked at the map. 9 minutes from here. 9 minutes. Wade looked at Crane. Crane looked back, and for the first time all evening, the controlled presentation had left him entirely. He was past calculation now. What lived in his face was the expression of a man who had built an 11-year structure and was watching it come apart with the understanding that he wasn't going to be able to stop it. "Victor," Wade said, "those documents are not getting signed. The money Rachel Monroe does not owe you, all of it, every compounded cent." He looked at Sutter. "You're going to stay here. You're going to think about what the FBI package looks like when they open it in Columbus. And then you're going to make whatever decision you're going to make. I'd recommend making it toward cooperation." He turned to Rachel. "Ghost stays here with you and with these two until the police arrive. Doc stays with you." Rachel looked at him. "You're going." Not a question. "Yes." She held his gaze for a moment. "Bring yourself back," she said. "Whatever's out there, bring yourself back." Wade walked toward the door. Then Flint's voice came through from outside where he had moved to check on the bikes, and what was in it was not anger, not urgency in the operational sense, but something quieter and colder. The voice of a man who has just seen something that changes the shape of the next several hours. "Wade," Flint said, "we have a problem at the supermarket." Wade stopped. "Hatch just reached me. Someone made a second call to the police. Not our call, a separate call. Said there was a gang-related disturbance at the Harmon Square and a child in immediate danger." A pause that had weight. 2 units arrived. They're questioning Hatch about who he is and why he's with Gracie and where her parents are. One officer is saying they need to contact Child Protective Services to take Gracie into temporary custody pending location of a guardian. Rachel made a sound that was not a word. "The units," Flint said, "are running dark, no emergency lights. Dispatched on a private channel that Doc caught on the scanner, not through the main dispatch frequency. They don't match any active call in the county log tonight." The cold came through the walls in a way that had nothing to do with October. Wade looked at Ghost. "Document everything. Do not let either of them leave this building." "Understood. Dr. Rachel stays with you. Nobody moves until federal assets arrive." He walked out. Outside, the cold was immediate. He crossed the gravel to his bike in a direct line. Flint was already at his machine. Stone had come around from the far side of the building. "Tell Hatch Route 9 West," Wade said. "Out of town. We'll intercept." "The units will follow," Flint said. "Yeah," Wade said. "That's the point." Word had already begun moving through the club channel by the time the 5 bikes hit Route 9. Someone monitoring the frequency from Columbus had sent it, and by the time the bikes turned west and opened their throttles, the responses were coming in through the channel short and without explanation, the way men respond when the reason is understood and the only question is where. 5 bikes running west on Route 9. The headlights pressing through the October fog, the engines running at a speed that was urgent without being reckless, because reckless served nobody here. Somewhere ahead in a vehicle he could not yet see Hatch. Briggs was driving with a 6-year-old in the back seat, trying to stay one turn ahead of people, dispatched on a private channel by men who had decided that the most efficient response to federal exposure was to eliminate the variables before the variables could testify. And 9 minutes in the other direction, behind a locked gate on a lake road in the dark, was a building where a man had been held and beaten and had stopped responding 22 minutes ago. A man whose name Wade had carved into the category of the dead 11 years ago and had carried there ever since. A man who was apparently alive. Who had been alive this entire time? Wade rode west. He thought about Hatch. He thought about a 6-year-old in a pink jacket with a purple backpack that kept sliding off her shoulder. He thought about what he had promised her in the exact words he had used. We're going to find her. The engines ran. The lights of Carver Falls appeared ahead in the distance. Somewhere in the parking lot of a supermarket with a half-dead neon sign, 2 vehicles were moving through the dark without their lights on. They met Hatch on a county road a mile west of the Route 9 junction. Hatch had pulled over when Flint's message came through and was waiting with his engine running and Gracie asleep in the back seat. Wade pulled up alongside. Cole was behind him. Hatch looked at Wade and then at the figure riding behind him and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. "We good," Hatch said. "We're good," Wade said. "The units pulled off about 2 minutes ago. County attorney made some calls." Hatch looked through his rear window. "Gracie's been asleep for a while." Wade looked through the back glass. Gracie was on the seat with her head against the door, the purple backpack still on her back, even in sleep, the clip buckle unclipped as always. She looked like what she was, a 6-year-old girl who had been awake through something far too large for a 6-year-old and whose body had simply decided that enough was enough. "There's a diner," Flint said, 2 miles west, open 24 hours. "Let's go," Wade said. The ride out to Kellerman Industrial was 12 minutes of a specific kind of thinking that Wade had learned over years to recognize and not fight. The kind of thinking that was not really thinking at all, but more like a clearing the mind, setting aside everything that was not immediately relevant and holding the space open for what was. The fog, the road surface, the timing, the shape of what they were riding into. He did not think about the F250 with the light bar during those 12 minutes. He did not know about it yet. He did not think about the name that Ghost had not yet found, the name that would arrive in a warehouse in Ohio and reorganize 11 years of what he had believed to be permanent. He thought about Rachel Monroe in a metal folding chair. He thought about Gracie Monroe on a concrete step. He thought about the 3 minutes on the security footage from a rear exit to car pulling away and what had been happening in the minutes and hours since. The Iron Hollow Riders had been together for 14 years. They had started as 7 men who rode together on weekends and had become something larger. Not in numbers particularly, because they had never been interested in numbers for their own sake, but in the quality of the thing, the depth of it, the way it had become over time, a structure that held when other structures failed. Wade had been president for 9 of those 14 years. He had not planned to be. He had not particularly wanted to be. But the man who had been president before him had asked him, and he had said yes, and it had turned out to be one of the few decisions in his adult life that he had not at some point or another questioned. The club was not what people thought it was. Most things were not what people thought they were. But the club especially was not what people thought it was, because what people thought it was had been shaped by stories and images that served purposes other than accuracy, that had very little to do with men in their 40s and 50s who rode on weekends and showed up when somebody needed showing up for. They showed up. That was the central thing. That was the thing around which everything else organized itself. When somebody needed something done and the ordinary structures had declined to do it, the Iron Hollow Riders showed up and did it. Not for money, not for recognition, not because they were asked, though sometimes they were, because it was the thing to do and they were the people available to do it. That was what Wade had been thinking in the broad, unspoken way that some understandings exist when he saw Gracie Monroe on those steps. He had stopped because stopping was the thing to do, and he was the person available to do it. The rest had followed from that. Inside the security office, Ghost worked with the efficiency of someone who had done this kind of work before in other contexts and who had brought those skills with him when he left. He did not explain what he was doing or why as he did it, and nobody asked him to. The results were what mattered, and the results came in sequence, each one narrowing the geography of the problem. Pinnacle Capital Solutions, Victor Crane, the court filing, the satellite image, the new padlock, and then the F-250 with the light bar and the name Roy Sutter, and the 16 months of payments from Pinnacle Capital to Ridgeline Consulting, and the name Roy D. Sutter attached to Ridgeline Consulting, and the specific cold that came into the air when the shape of it became clear. A deputy who had been receiving payments from the man whose people had taken Rachel Monroe, who was now parked inside a locked gate in a vacant industrial lot at 10 o'clock at night, with no active dispatch order anywhere in the county to explain his presence. Wade stood at the fence with the fog moving around him and ran the calculations that needed to be run and came out the other side of them with the approach that was least likely to make the situation worse. Not loud and fast, not in a way that gave an armed man a reason to make a decision he could not take back. In the right way, even if in the right way meant slower, even if slower cost minutes they did not have to spare. Shadow opened the gate from the inside and they walked the bikes through and went the rest of the way on foot, and the silence of it was the right kind of silence, the kind that meant they understood each other in the situation and what was required. The warehouse was long and low and dark except for the 2 work lights burning in the central area, and in the light from those work lights, a woman named Rachel Monroe was sitting in a metal folding chair with her hands zip-tied behind her and a scattered canvas bag on the floor, and a pink hair clip that belonged to her daughter lying among the spilled contents. Wade said, "Rachel Monroe, your daughter sent us." And something changed in her face that was the most important thing that changed in that building all night. The confrontation with Crane was not complicated in the way that confrontations can be complicated when the other side has leverage. Crane had leverage, but it was leverage that was dissolving in real time as Ghost worked and transmitted, and the FBI field office in Columbus opened files that had been waiting 14 months for something attachable. The documents on the table were never going to be signed. That had been determined the moment Wade walked through the door. What remained was the management of the exit, the management of Sutter, the management of Rachel's physical condition, and the transmission of what Ghost had assembled. Ghost sent it and said, "Sent," and that was the word that changed everything in the larger sense. The word that meant the information had left the building and was beyond anyone's power to call back. And then the name came through the earpiece. Cole Callahan. And Wade stood very still in a warehouse in Ohio and listened to his brother's name being spoken by a voice that was not his brother's, and something reorganized itself in the place behind his sternum, where the permanent things lived some large piece of what he had understood about his own life shifting on its foundation. He had been told 11 years ago. He had believed it. He had done what you do with something you believe, which is build around it, build the rest of your life in the shape that the information creates. You do not know you are building around something false. You just build. And the building accumulates 11 years of it until a voice in an earpiece in a warehouse says a name. You had retired to the category of the dead. Cole Callahan. He did not show what happened in that moment on his face. He had learned a long time ago in a place far from Ohio how to manage what the face showed and what it did not. But Ghost knew because Ghost always knew, and Flint knew because Flint had been riding beside Wade for 9 years and had developed a specific literacy for what Wade's face was and was not showing. Neither of them said anything immediately. They gave it the moment it required. Then Wade gave Ghost the plate, and Ghost found the property and said 9 minutes. And Wade said, "How long until federal assets?" And Ghost said 63 under standard protocol. And Wade made the calculation that 63 minus 9 was 54, and 54 was not a comfortable number, but it was the number they had. They left Ghost and Doc at the warehouse with Rachel and Crane and Sutter, and they rode west to intercept Hatch and Gracie, and they split at the junction. And 5 minutes later, Wade was on Crane Lake Road with the fog coming off the water, and the trees meeting overhead, and the particular cold of a place that never fully dried. The fog on Crane Lake Road was different from the fog on Route 9. It came off the water rather than the ground, heavier, wetter, carrying the mineral smell of still lake water and dead leaves, and the particular cold of a place that stayed shaded even in summer and never fully dried out. The trees came close on both sides of the road, mature hardwoods whose canopy met overhead and cut the ambient light to almost nothing. The headlights of the 3 bikes pressed a narrow tunnel through the dark, and the wet leaves on the road surface reflected them back in broken pieces. Wade had split the group at the Route 9 junction. Flint and Stone were riding west toward Hatch and Gracie. Wade took Shadow and one other toward Crane Lake Road. 9 minutes, Ghost had said. The federal response was still 58 minutes out under standard protocol. The math was not comfortable, but it was the only math available, and uncomfortable math was still math. The driveway entrance was a break in the tree line on the left, marked by a wooden beam gate of the rural kind, hinged at one post designed to discourage casual trespass rather than stop anyone determined. The gate was open. Wade stopped the bike at the entrance and cut the engine. The others stopped and cut theirs. In the silence through the trees and down the driveway, light was visible from a structure set back from the road. Multiple sources, too much of it, and too directed the kind of light that meant people were working in a space rather than living in it. And beneath the light, faintly at the very edge of audible, a voice, male, steady. The quality of a man speaking with the controlled patience of someone who has asked the same question several times and is running low on the particular patience required to ask it again. Wade looked at Shadow. Shadow was already off his bike and moving toward the tree line. He disappeared into it without a discernible transition point. One moment present, the next absorbed by the dark and the trees and whatever technique he had developed over years in places nobody talked about. Wade waited. The cold came off the lake from behind the property on a different current than the road, wetter, heavier. 4 minutes. Shadow came back from the direction of the building rather than the tree line, which meant he had already completed a full circuit of the property in the time he had been gone. He stopped beside Wade and spoke below a breath. 3 inside, 2 standing, 1 seated. The one in the chair has been hit. Face. Wrists show restraint marks. Conscious. Barely moving, but conscious. He paused. One of the standing men is Crane. The other is younger 30s, shaved head, professional build. The man in the chair, Wade said. Shadow looked at him steadily. Late 30s, lean, left eye swollen nearly shut, cut above the brow dried. He is holding his head at the angle of someone managing jaw pain by not moving the thing that hurts. A pause. He has been there a while. 54 minutes until federal assets. Wade thought about Gracie, about the specific words he had used without qualifiers. He held all of it in the space of one breath and then set it aside the way he had learned to set things aside. Not forever, just long enough to be useful. We're going in, he said. He walked down the driveway directly. No count, no ceremony. Shadow fell in behind him and the third man took the far approach toward the lakeside entrance Shadow had already identified on his circuit of the property. The house resolved from the dark as they moved. A lake property from the previous decade wood frame, 2 stories, the kind of place that had been expensive when it was built and had been maintained in a way that communicated continued investment. Covered porch across the front. The light was coming from the ground floor interior, visible through 2 large windows facing the driveway. Wade went up the porch steps. Old wood. The second step from the top had a soft spot that compressed without fully creaking. He stepped to the edge of it. Through the window, he had a full view of the interior. Victor Crane stood at the center of the room near a folding table covered in documents. The gray suit was the same. The tie was gone, and the top button of the dress shirt was open, and the controlled presentation had frayed in a way that made him simultaneously less polished and more dangerous. The second man was near the rear wall, 30s shaved head, standing with his weight distributed in the posture of someone maintaining operational readiness. He was holding a phone, his attention split between the screen and the man in the chair. The man in the chair was Cole Callahan. Wade had not seen his brother in 11 years, and the face in that chair was the face of a man in his late 30s who looked like the person Wade remembered the way a photograph taken in hard weather looks like the original photograph, recognizable in its essential structure, altered by accumulation. Cole had always been lean, always the wiry one, the one who moved fast and thought faster. And the leanness now had the quality of something that had been tested repeatedly and had held but at a cost. His face showed the geography of a man who had been hit, the left eye swollen to a narrow aperture, a cut along the brow that had bled and dried. The jaw held at the careful angle of someone managing pain by not moving the thing that hurts. His hands were zip-tied to the arms of the chair. His eyes were open. Crane was speaking to him. Wade could not hear the words through the glass, but he could read the body language, the standing over posture, the pressed delivery of a man who had asked a question multiple times and was on the final version of his patience. Cole's head was tilted slightly upward, looking at Crane with the expression of someone who had decided on a response and was maintaining it under conditions designed to erode it, not giving him anything. Wade tried the door. It was unlocked. He would think about that later. The unlocked door on a property where a man was conducting exactly the kind of business that should have every access point secured. Crane was a man who operated through structure and leverage and intermediaries, and had never personally been present when things went wrong. The locked gate at the warehouse had been sufficient until it wasn't. The unlocked door was the same assumption in a different location. The door opened. Wade walked through it. Crane turned. The man with the phone turned faster, better trained, and his right hand moved toward his jacket. Then Wade was inside, and Shadow was in the doorway, and the third man was coming through the lake entrance at the far end simultaneously, and the geometry of the space changed in a way that the man with the phone correctly assessed in approximately 1 second. He stopped moving his hand. He stood very still. Wade crossed the room to the chair. He crouched in front of Cole. Cole looked at him. One eye mostly open, one mostly not. The recognition was immediate. It moved across his face in the specific way of recognition that has been carried for a long time and has been certain it would arrive eventually, but was not certain it would arrive like this in a lake house in Ohio at 10:30 on a Tuesday night with a zip tie on each wrist and a cut above his eye. "Hey," Cole said. His voice was thick on one side, the jaw managing the consonants carefully. "Hey," Wade said. 11 years of silence lived in the two syllables, and neither of them had the capacity to address it right now, and both of them understood that without it being said. "Can you walk?" Wade said. "Yeah." "You sure?" I said, "Yeah." Wade looked at the zip ties. He reached back without looking, and Shadow placed a knife handle in his palm. Wade cut the left tie, then the right. Cole brought his hands forward slowly and held them together against his chest, pressing them flat. His wrist showed the redness of someone who had been pulling against the restraints. Wade stood. He turned to Crane. Victor Crane had not moved from the center of the room. His expression had undergone the same collapse Wade had seen in the warehouse, but deeper now, past adjustment. There was something in his face that had crossed from calculation into a space beyond it. "You don't understand what you have done," Crane said. Wade looked at him. "The federal investigation. The financial records your man transmitted tonight. There are people attached to Pinnacle Capital Solutions who are not Victor Crane. People whose names are in those records who hold positions where those names cannot appear in federal documents." "Then they should have thought about that," Wade said. "You don't know who they are. Doesn't matter who they are." Crane looked at him directly. Not at Ghost, not at Shadow, at Wade. "There will be a response to what happened tonight. Not from me. I understand what I am facing. But from the people whose names are in those records. People with resources and reach and no interest in federal exposure. They will work backward from the investigation to everyone involved in this room tonight. That is not a threat. That is a description of how these people operate." The room was quiet. Wade looked at Crane for a long moment. "What are their names?" he said. Crane was silent. "Victor," Wade said. "You are done. Your operation is done. Sutter is done. The shell companies are done. Hey, Sam, the only variable you can control from here is what you choose to say in the next few minutes and who you choose to say it to." He paused. "Federal investigators are less than an hour away. Anything you tell me reaches them with your cooperation on record." Crane looked at Cole. Cole from the chair, managing his jaw, carefully said, "Tell him, Victor." Something passed between Crane and Cole that Wade did not have the full context to read. 8 months of proximity. 8 months of a relationship built on false architecture and real proximity, and whatever scar tissue had formed in that time moved in Crane's face in some direction. Crane said a name, then another. A federal judge, a member of the Harmon County Oversight Board. Ghost's voice came through the earpiece immediately. "Wade, these names expand the investigation significantly beyond Crane. The judge sits on the federal bench in Franklin County, sending both names to the Columbus agent right now." A pause. "He is not waiting for the standard response window. These names change the protocol. He is making calls right now." The man with the phone said, "Victor, stop." Cole said to him, "Those names are already in the federal records, as of 2 hours ago." The man's jaw worked. Shadow stepped to his side. Just presence. The man sat down on the edge of the table and did not say anything else. Wade looked at Crane one final time. "Stay here, both of you. When federal agents arrive, you will have a conversation that determines a great deal about the rest of your lives. I would recommend having it honestly." He turned to the door. Cole said, "Wade." Wade stopped. "There is something I need to tell you," Cole said, "about how you were told what you were told, about who told you." I know there is, Wade said, and we are going to have that conversation. He looked at his brother. Can you walk? Cole tested the answer by standing. He made it upright, one hand on the chair back. Yeah, he said. Then let's go. Outside, cold and fog and dark. Cole stopped at the edge of the gravel and looked at the motorcycles. I don't have a bike, he said. You're riding with me, Wade said. He said it the way you say things when the logistics are simple and the time is short. Cole looked at the motorcycle, then at Wade. Okay, he said. They got on. The engine started. 3 bikes moving out of the driveway onto Crane Lake Road and turning west toward Route 9. They met Hatch and the others on the county road. Hatch was parked on the shoulder with his engine running and Gracie asleep in the back seat. Wade pulled up alongside. Cole dismounted carefully. Hatch climbed out and walked around the front of the car and looked at Cole for a long moment with the wire-rimmed glasses catching what little light existed. You all right, Hatch said. Working on it, Cole said. Hatch nodded once. That was sufficient. The diner was called Patsy's, and it had been operating since 1987, and it had the specific quality of diners that had survived every economic cycle in their county by being exactly what they were, with no ambition to be anything else. Vinyl booths in dark red, laminate tables, overhead lighting brighter than necessary but somehow forgiving anyway. A counter with round stools along the window. The smell of coffee and bacon grease, and the warmth of a space that had been continuously heated for decades and had absorbed that warmth into its walls, into its vinyl and its laminate and its ceiling tiles. They took 2 booths and the counter stools. It was past midnight. The night shift waitress looked at the group as they came through the door with the professional assessment of a woman who had worked this shift for many years and had placed most categories of late-night diner patron correctly without drama. She looked at the leather and the road wear and the specific states of damage on various faces. She looked at the man with the swollen eye and the butterfly strips across his brow. She looked at the child being carried in on Hatch's shoulder, still mostly asleep. She got menus without commentary. Gracie had been transferred from the back seat of Hatch's car to a booth bench with her pink jacket folded under her head. She slept with the absolute totality of a child whose body had made a unilateral decision that consciousness was no longer an option, it was willing to support. Her purple backpack was still on her back, even in sleep, the clip buckle unclipped as it always was. Hatch sat across from her, hands around his coffee mug, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who was processing something he had decided was a private matter. Rachel had arrived with her sister 20 minutes after the diner brought by Flint from the gas station, where they had pulled over after the units on Route 9 had stood down. She was sitting in the booth with her hands around her own mug, looking at her daughter's sleeping face with the expression of a woman who has used everything she had and is running now on something below the ordinary threshold of reserve. Something that does not have a name, but that keeps a person upright when the ordinary mechanisms have run out. Doc had handed the warehouse situation to the first federal agents on scene at Kellerman and ridden to the diner without being asked. That was the thing about Doc. He was always where he needed to be before anyone thought to say so. He sat 2 stools down from where Cole would sit, drank his coffee, and did not intrude on what was happening between the 2 men beside him. Wade sat at the counter. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the steam rising from the surface. The stool beside him took weight. Cole sat down. His eye was worse in the diner light. The cut above the brow had been closed with 2 of Doc's butterfly strips from the medical kit which held it, but made the surrounding area look more dramatic than it would once the swelling receded in the days ahead. He was holding his coffee mug with both hands, the same grip as Wade, the same posture, and Wade looked at that for a moment without commenting on it. The thing genetics did that was indifferent to 11 years of absence. The same grip, the same posture, the same way of wrapping both hands around a mug when something needed to be held. They sat at the counter and drank bad coffee and did not speak for a while. Then Wade said without looking at him, "Who told me?" It was not a question. Cole set his mug down carefully. "Our father," he said. The word landed with the weight of a word that had not been spoken between them in much longer than 11 years. "When I went under," Cole said, "the operation I was entering was not the kind you tell your family about and return to family dinners. There is a protocol. You sever completely. I told him not to tell you anything." He paused. "He decided on his own that telling you I was dead was cleaner than telling you I was just gone somewhere you couldn't follow. He thought you would look for me if you knew I was alive and just unreachable. Wade said nothing. He was right, Cole said. You would have. Yes, Wade said. I would have. Another pause. The diner held its quiet around them, not silence, but the specific low frequency of a place where noise had dropped to the level of background existence. Someone at the far end of the counter eating pie. The sound of the kitchen, the low hum of equipment, and the occasional sound of metal on metal. The waitress moving between tables with the unhurried competence of a woman at the end of a long shift who had stopped performing energy she did not have. Izzy, Wade started. March, Cole said, last year. Wade absorbed that. He sat very still and absorbed the second impact in a sequence of impacts the way you absorb a second blow when the body has already spent its initial response on the first one and has to manage the new information on whatever reserves remain. Their father, March of last year, a month in which Wade had been doing whatever he had been doing, riding, managing the club, living in the life he had built, in the space left by the family that had fractured at its foundation long before either of these phone calls had happened. He had not known. He had been told a story 11 years ago and had lived inside that story and had not known that the story was wrong. And now the man who had told him the story was gone, and the question of why could only be answered by what Cole had just told him, which was that their father had thought it was the right thing to do and had made the decision alone. I didn't know how to find you, Cole said. His voice had changed. The controlled delivery of a man trained to communicate under pressure had left it, and what was underneath was something older and less managed, something that had been held at a certain internal pressure for a long time. After he passed, I didn't know if you would want to be found. After 11 years, I didn't know what finding you would look like or whether you'd... Cole, Wade said. His brother stopped. I'm here, Wade said. It was not forgiveness. It was not an accounting of what had been taken, or what 11 years of carrying a false fact felt like in the place behind your sternum where the permanent things live. It was simpler than any of that. The specific, unembellished statement of a man sitting on a counter stool at 1 a.m. next to his brother who was alive, who was injured, who was going to need a hospital, and a federal debrief, and a very long conversation at some point in the near future. It was here. It was enough for now. Something went out of Cole's face. Not tears, nothing that visible. Just the release of tension in the muscles around the eye and the jaw, the expression of a man who has been maintaining something at pressure for a long time and has just been given somewhere to set a portion of it down. Flint appeared at the counter beside Wade, leaning against it rather than sitting holding his mug. He looked at Cole for a moment. Cole looked back. Flint said, for what it's worth. Cole said, what? The girl's fine. Flint paused. What you let happen tonight, what you allowed to proceed because of the operational calculus you were working with, you are going to carry that. I know that and you know that. But she is fine. He looked at his mug. I'm not saying it makes it equal. I'm saying she is fine. It was the most Flint had said to someone he was angry at in a single statement in all the years Wade had known him. Wade recognized it for what it was. The specific generosity of a man who leads with his protective instinct and has to work backward from it to something resembling grace, and who does that work because he has decided the work is worth doing even when it is difficult, especially when it is difficult. Cole said thank you. Flint went back to his booth. The food arrived. At some point after the food, in the low interval between eating and the next cup of coffee, a small sound came from the booth where Gracie was sleeping. Not a word, just the shift in breathing that means a sleeping child is about to stop sleeping. Gracie opened her eyes. She did not wake with the confusion of a child disoriented by an unfamiliar place. She woke the way she had been awake before, directly, with the particular clarity of a child who has been awake through something large and has absorbed enough of it that even her sleep has been watchful. She took in the room from the booth bench with her jacket still folded under her head. She looked at Hatch across the table. He gave her a small nod. She sat up. She looked at the bikers in the booths and at the counter. She found Wade. She slid out of the booth and Hatch started to reach for her and then stopped. She walked across the diner floor in her cartoon rabbit sneakers and climbed up onto the stool beside Cole. She looked at his face with the direct assessment of a 6-year-old who has decided to look at something and has not yet learned to look away from things that are difficult to see. You got hurt? She said. A little, Cole said. Does it hurt? A little. She nodded. The answer was acceptable. She had accepted things tonight that adults 3 times her age would have struggled to accept, and the information that this man had been hurt a little, and that it hurt a little registered as something she could work with. Then she turned to Wade. "Did you keep your promise?" she said. Wade looked at her. "You said you were going to find her," Gracie said. "You said it like you meant it." "Yeah," Wade said, "we found her." Gracie looked at her mother. Rachel was watching from the booth across the diner, and her face was the face of a woman who had reached the bottom of the longest night of her life and found something still there. Not certainty, not safety in the permanent sense that nobody can actually provide to anybody else. But this room, this hour, her daughter on a counter stool in a diner that smelled like coffee and bacon grease talking to a man with a scar along his jaw. Gracie turned back to the counter. She pulled her purple backpack around from where it had been hanging off her shoulder. The clip buckle still unclipped, as it always was, and opened it with the focused attention of a child who knows exactly what she is looking for. She rummaged in the small interior for a moment. She produced a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it on the counter, carefully smoothing the creases flat with the palm of her small hand, taking her time with it the way you handle something you made with care and want to present correctly. It was a crayon drawing done in the supermarket during the part of the evening when she had been sitting in the aisle with Hatch, and the world had been very large and very uncertain, and she had had nothing but a piece of paper from the back of a receipt and whatever crayons were in her backpack. The wax marks were thick and decisive, with the specific confidence of a 6-year-old artist who does not second-guess her choices. 7 motorcycles in a row. Each one rendered in the certain imprecision of crayon. The wheels slightly misaligned the handlebars, varying in width from machine to machine, but unmistakably motorcycles, unmistakably 7 of them, unmistakably in a row, like the ones she had seen in the parking lot when the sound came and she lifted her head for the first time in hours. A small figure standing beside them. Pink jacket, purple backpack, white shoes with something on the ankle that might have been a rabbit. And above the whole scene, taking up nearly a third of the page, a large yellow star. She pushed it across the counter toward Wade. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Not quickly. Not with the brief acknowledgement of a man who has somewhere to be. He looked at the motorcycles in their imprecise row, and at the small figure with the backpack, and at the yellow star, above everything, drawn with the kind of certainty that only exists in a person who has not yet learned to doubt the things they know to be true. He picked it up carefully. The way you pick up something that is not going to be set down carelessly. He folded it along its original crease, then he folded it again, making it smaller, handling it with the deliberate care of something that is being placed somewhere specific and permanent. He reached into his jacket and tucked it into the interior pocket on the left side against the place behind his sternum where the weight lived, where it had always lived. Gracie watched him do it with the complete and unblinking attention of a child observing whether something important is being done correctly. "So you'll remember," she said. Wade looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "so I'll remember." Rachel's sister had arrived from Dayton at 2:47 in the morning in a 10-year-old Subaru that pulled into the diner parking lot at a speed that communicated 2 hours of highway driving with a specific kind of urgency. She was older than Rachel, and she came through the diner door and across the floor, and had Rachel in her arms before she had finished scanning the room. And the sound the two sisters made was the compressed, wordless version of the same collision that had happened in the parking lot when Gracie first saw her mother, the same fundamental physics of people who belong to each other, reaching each other after the distance has been too great for too long. Gracie watched from the counter stool. Then her aunt opened the embrace wider. Gracie got down from the stool and walked to her mother and her aunt and went in. The 3 of them stood in a diner in Carver Falls, Ohio, at 2:47 in the morning, and the bikers in the booths and at the counter looked at other things and let the reunion have the space it required. Ghost received confirmation at 3:15. Victor Crane was in federal custody at the Crane Lake property. Deputy Roy Sutter had been detained at the warehouse by the first federal agents to arrive on scene. The federal judge and the oversight board member were being contacted by investigators in Columbus. The financial records, the warehouse footage, the payment records connecting Sutter to Pinnacle Capital, the names Crane had provided. All of it was in federal hands, and the investigation had expanded significantly beyond where it had started. It was done. The part of it that had started on a concrete step outside a supermarket was done. At some point before 4 in the morning, Cole said to Wade, "When it's all settled, the debrief, the testimony, what happens after that?" Wade looked at his coffee. "What do you want to happen?" "I've been someone else for 13 years, Cole said. Cole Briggs for 8 months before that, other names before that. Before all of it, I was Daniel in a story that ended too fast and then was supposed to be over." He turned his mug on the counter. "I don't know if I know how to be myself anymore. I don't know what that looks like or where he lives or if he has anyone who knew him before." Wade looked at his brother. The swollen eye and the butterfly strips in the jaw held at that careful angle. The same mug grip, the same posture. "He's got one person," Wade said. Cole looked at him. "He's got one person who knew him before," Wade said. "That's a start." Something went out of Cole's face that had been living there for a long time. When Wade stood from his counter stool at 4 in the morning and put money under his mug and turned toward the door, Rachel got up from the booth and crossed the diner and stopped in front of him. She was small and exhausted in the cellular way that does not resolve with one night of sleep, and she was going to be dealing with the aftermath of tonight for a long time. The federal paperwork, the legal dissolution of a debt that had never been legitimate, the reconstruction of a life that had been operating under threat for months. She knew it and he knew it, and neither of them said anything about it because it was ahead and they were here. She looked at him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't need to," Wade said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached forward and briefly placed her hand against his arm. Not a handshake, not an embrace, something smaller and more specific. The gesture of a person acknowledging presence rather than expressing gratitude. The recognition of someone who was there, who had stopped in a night when the machinery of a town had decided not to. Then she stepped back. Wade walked through the door. In the parking lot, 37 motorcycles were parked in a line stretching from the front of the diner to the far edge of the lot. Not 7, 37. Word had moved through the club network sometime after midnight, and the men had come from Columbus and from the surrounding county without being summoned, without anyone asking, without explanation required. They were simply there when Wade walked out into the pre-dawn cold, standing near their machines in the particular loose configuration of men who have arrived somewhere and are waiting without needing to be told what they are waiting for or why their presence matters. Wade stood at the edge of the porch and looked at them. Doc was among them, having handed the warehouse situation to federal agents and ridden over without being asked which was the thing about Doc. Stone, shadow, flint. The whole of what had come out tonight and more besides. Men he had ridden with for years and men he had not ridden with in some time, men who had gotten the word through the channel and had decided without deliberation that the word was sufficient reason to be here. He looked at his bike. He looked at the diner window. Through the glass, he could see the booth. Rachel and her sister and Gracie, the three of them, in the yellow diner light, Gracie pressed against her mother's side, Rachel's arm around her, the sister's hand resting on the table. The waitress was pouring coffee from the pot that had been going since well before any of them arrived. The steam rose from the cups. Gracie was looking out the window. She saw him. She raised one hand. Small. The specific gesture of a child who has understood something about tonight that she may not have words for yet. Something about the way the world can fail and then the way it can also not fail. The gesture of someone holding something and beginning carefully to let it go, but wanting to mark the moment first before letting it go entirely. Wade raised his hand. Then he looked at the road. He put his helmet on. He started his bike. The others started theirs one by one, the way they always started, not all at once, but in sequence, each engine adding its voice to the accumulated sound until 37 machines were running in the pre-dawn dark of a parking lot in Carver Falls, Ohio, and the sound was the sound of something that had decided collectively and without announcement to exist in the same place at the same time for the same reason. He rolled out of the parking lot onto Route 9 heading east, and behind him the others came one by one until the formation was complete. 37 machines and 36 riders moving through the first thin suggestion of morning, the fog still low on the fields, the sky at the eastern edge beginning its first reluctant consideration of light, not yet visible as light itself, but present as the absence of the deepest dark. The hour before dawn that has no good name but that anyone who has been awake through a long night knows by feel. 2 miles east, the Harmon Square supermarket sat quiet at the edge of town. The parking lot was empty at this hour, the cracked asphalt and the old oil stains and the yellow light that made everything look a little hollowed out. The neon sign above the entrance was the same as it had always been. The H was dark. The S flickered every 4 seconds in its slow, steady rhythm, the pulse of something too stubborn to quit, too stubborn to call it finished, just because half of it had stopped working. The concrete steps in front of the entrance were cold and bare and clean. Nobody sitting on them, not anymore. The engines ran east into the edge of the morning, and the road opened ahead of them, flat and wide and cold, and full of the particular quality of early light on empty ground, the kind of light that does not promise anything specific, that does not come with guarantees or easy mornings, or the absence of whatever a man has accumulated in the place behind his sternum over a lifetime of paying attention to things that mattered and things that did not. But that is there anyway, every morning, on the far side of the dark, the kind of light that is enough. The lake house on Crane Lake Road told Wade something about Victor Crane before he went inside. A man who buys a lake house on 17 acres with private access and registers it through a family trust is a man who has been thinking about contingencies for a long time. The lake house is not a vacation property. It is a place to go when things go wrong, a controlled environment that functions independently of the structures that might collapse. The gate at the warehouse had been Crane's first line. The lake house was the second. The wooden gate across the driveway was open. That was the first signal. A man securing a contingency property does not leave the gate open unless the contingency is already in motion, and speed has become more important than concealment. Whatever Crane's man with the phone had been told on the drive from the warehouse, it had created a level of urgency that overrode the basic security protocols. Or Crane had not expected anyone to follow this quickly. He had not expected the club to split and redirect. He had expected perhaps that the arrival of federal assets in 63 minutes would be the next interruption he had to manage. He had been wrong about that. Shadow completed his circuit of the property in 4 minutes, which was fast even by Shadow standards. He came back and gave Wade the information in 17 words, which was 17 more words than Shadow usually used when fewer would serve. The specificity mattered here. The man in the chair, the swollen eye, the dried blood above the brow, the angle of the jaw that said pain being managed rather than pain being expressed. Cole. Wade had not said the name aloud. He had not needed to. Shadow had looked at him after the description, and something had passed between them in the look that was not a question and not an answer, but a kind of acknowledgement. Shadow had been riding with Wade for 7 years. He knew the name that had existed in the category of the dead. He had heard it once a long time ago in a different context, and he had filed it away in the way Shadow filed everything, quietly and without apparent effort and with perfect retention. The unlocked door was either an oversight or an invitation, and Wade had chosen to treat it as an oversight and walk through it without ceremony, because ceremony cost time and time was the one resource that was genuinely finite tonight. Inside the folding table with its stack of documents was a mirror of the warehouse, which told Wade something about the way Crane operated. He carried the same setup from location to location. The portable work lights on stands, the folding table, the documents stacked with the pen laid across the top, the chair positioned in the center of the cleared area. It was the setup of a man who had done this before in other buildings with other people in the chair, who had standardized the process because standardization increased efficiency, and efficiency served the outcome. The outcome had always been the signature. The outcome was not going to be the signature tonight. Wade crouched in front of Cole and looked at his brother for the first time in 11 years and said, "Hey," and Cole said, "Hey back." And the 11 years were in those 2 syllables in a way that could not be addressed right now, and both of them knew it. There was a building to exit, and a federal timeline to consider, and a woman and a 6-year-old to get back to, and an immediate logistical problem of how to get Cole out of a chair with zip-tied wrists and onto a motorcycle. The logistical problems were solvable. Shadow had a knife. The motorcycle could carry 2. The 9 minutes back to Route 9 would take 9 minutes, regardless of who was on which bike. What was not immediately solvable was 11 years of a false fact, and neither of them tried to solve it right there on the floor of Victor Crane's lake house contingency property, while the federal assets were 54 minutes out, and Crane's man with the phone was sitting on the edge of the folding table being watched by Shadow. Cole had told Victor Crane to tell Wade the names. That was the moment that surprised Wade most, not Crane providing the names, which was the rational decision of a man whose leverage was gone and who was beginning to think about what came next. But Cole telling him to. Cole in the chair, with his wrists freed and his hands held against his chest, saying, "Tell him, Victor," with the authority of the man who had spent 8 months inside an operation and understood exactly which pressure point would produce the necessary result. That was not the brother Wade had last seen 11 years ago. The brother he had last seen had been 27 years old and wiry and fast and smart, in the way of someone who had not yet learned to direct the smartness with discipline. What was in that chair was the result of 13 years of direction of discipline, of becoming someone else in the service of work that Wade had not known was being done. He did not know yet what to do with the distance between those two versions, the one he remembered and the one in the chair. He tucked it away to think about later, the way you tuck things away when there is work to be done that cannot wait for the thinking. On the ride back toward Route 9, with Cole's hands gripping the back of his jacket, Wade felt the cold on his face and thought about their father. March of last year, a month Wade had moved through without knowing that one of the fixed coordinates of his life had shifted, without knowing that the man who had told him the false story was gone and had taken with him whatever reason he had believed it was the right thing to say. He thought about that. He thought about a man deciding alone in the privacy of his own conscience that his older son needed to believe his younger son was dead. He thought about what it had cost to make that decision and live with it for 11 years. He did not arrive at forgiveness on Crane Lake Road in the dark with the fog coming off the water. He did not arrive at anger either. He arrived at something more complicated than either of those things, something that did not yet have a name and that would need time and conversation to become one. He had time. Cole was alive. Time was now something they had. The diner at 4 in the morning had the specific quality of diners at that hour, the quality that belongs to places that have been open continuously and have received all categories of human being through the night and have not judged any of them that exist in the hour before dawn as neutral ground, where the usual rules about what is appropriate to say or feel are suspended by the simple fact of everyone being awake when the rest of the world is not. 37 motorcycles in the parking lot. Wade had looked at them when he walked out and felt something that was not pride, not exactly, but was adjacent to it. Not pride in the numbers, not pride in the spectacle of it, pride in the fact of it. That word had gone out through the channel, and men had responded without being asked and without needing an explanation, because the explanation was implied by the word itself. There was a thing that needed doing. There were people available to do it. That was the whole of the explanation, and it was sufficient. That was what the Iron Hollow Riders were when you stripped away the leather and the chrome and the reputation that preceded them into every room they entered. A group of men who showed up, who had decided collectively that showing up was the thing, and who had built the rest of it around that central decision. Wade stood at the edge of the diner porch and looked at 37 machines and 36 men, and at the window behind which Gracie Monroe was looking out at him with her small hand raised. He raised his. Then he looked at the road, because the road was ahead and the night was ending, and there was nothing left behind him that required his attention except the things he would carry with him, which were the same things he had always carried, the weight of the inventory. The people he had reached and the people he had not added now to a folded piece of paper in the interior pocket of his jacket on the left side. A yellow star above 7 motorcycles. "So you'll remember," she had said. "Yeah," he had said. "So I'll remember." He would remember. He would remember the specific color of the neon sign and the way the S flickered every 4 seconds, and the puddle on the second step, and the purple backpack sliding off one shoulder, and the cartoon rabbits on the sneakers, and the hand she had put in his, small and cold and trusting, in a way that had nothing to do with him specifically and everything to do with the simple fact that he had stopped. He would remember the way she said, "Those are good," about the crackers with Hatch. The way she said, "Come with," when he asked her. The way she said, "You said it like you meant it," when she asked about the promise. He would remember all of it. That was what the drawing was for. Not so he would remember the events which he would carry regardless, but so he would remember what the events had cost and what they had produced and what the specific shape of showing up looked like when a 6-year-old drew it from memory with crayons in the aisle of a supermarket while she waited for the sound of engines coming back. The engines started now one by one, and the sound filled the parking lot of Patsy's Diner in Carver Falls, Ohio, at 4 in the morning, and it was the sound of 37 machines that had decided to be in the same place at the same time, which was a different sound from any single machine, a sound that had its own presence and its own weight in the air. Wade rolled east on Route 9. Behind him, the formation assembled itself without instruction, the way it always assembled itself, each rider finding their position in the sequence with the ease of people who have done this enough times that the doing has become its own kind of knowledge. 37 engines on a two-lane state highway in Ohio at 4 in the morning, the fog still on the fields on both sides, the sky at the horizon beginning its slow negotiation with the dark. The Harmon Square supermarket passed on the left, the H still dark, the S still flickering its 4-second pulse. The concrete steps in front of the entrance bare and cold and clean. Nobody sitting on them. The road opened ahead of them, and they rode into it. Wade Callahan had been 47 years old for 3 months when he rode into the parking lot of the Harmon Square supermarket on a Tuesday evening in October and saw a 6-year-old girl sitting alone on a concrete step. He had spent those 3 months the same way he spent most of his time riding, managing the club, handling the small administrative work of being president of an organization that was larger than it appeared from the outside and more complicated than it appeared from the inside. He had spent those 3 months carrying the same inventory he always carried, the weight that lived behind his sternum, the accumulated mass of a life that had been full of decisions made in difficult conditions with imperfect information. He had not been looking for anything particular that Tuesday evening. They had stopped at the Harmon Square because Hatch needed motor oil, and they were passing through Carver Falls on the way back from a run that had taken them east along Route 40 and then north through the state forest and then west back toward Columbus. It was a practical stop, the kind that happens 100 times in a year, of riding unremarkable in every way until the moment it became remarkable. The S on the sign flickered its 4-second pulse, and the parking lot was cracked asphalt and old oil stains, and the cold had found every gap in every collar, and the world was going about the business of an ordinary Tuesday in October, and a 6-year-old girl was sitting alone on the third step and had been there for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Wade had stopped. That was the whole beginning of it. He had stopped. The rest had followed from that single decision, which was not even a decision in the deliberate sense, but more like a reflex, the way your hand moves towards something that is falling before your mind has processed that something is falling. He had stopped, and he had crouched, and he had looked up at her instead of down and said, "You okay, kid?" And she had said, "My mom went in, she didn't come back," and that was the beginning. Everything that followed the security footage, the plate, the name Victor Crane, the warehouse at Kellerman, Industrial, the deputy, with payments from Pinnacle Capital, the FBI file open 14 months, the name Cole Callahan spoken into an earpiece in a building that smelled of rust and disuse, and the lake house on Crane Lake Road, and the unlocked door, and his brother in a chair, and the diner at 4 in the morning, and the folded piece of crayon drawing in the interior pocket of his jacket. All of it had followed from a single moment in a parking lot in Carver Falls when he saw a child alone and stopped. He thought about this on Route 9 heading east in the pre-dawn dark. The formation of 37 machines spread behind him, the fog still on the fields, and the sky beginning its slow negotiation with the dark at the horizon. He thought about all the other moments when the stopping happened or did not happen. All the other people on those steps in the parking lot who had looked and kept walking, who had made the calculation that it was not their problem and had moved on to their ordinary Tuesday. He did not think about them with judgment. He had made that calculation himself in other situations in other years. You could not stop for everything. The world presented too many things to stop for, and a person had to choose, and the choosing was never simple. But sometimes the choosing was simple. Sometimes you looked at something and the choice was already made before you understood you were making it. Sometimes the reflex was faster than the deliberation, and the reflex was correct, and all you had to do was trust it and follow where it led. He had followed where it led. The county road had taken them to Kellerman Industrial, and Kellerman Industrial had taken them to a warehouse, and the warehouse had taken them to a lake house, and the lake house had taken them to a diner, and the diner had taken them to this 37 machines on Route 9 East, heading into the first suggestion of morning with a folded piece of crayon paper in his jacket pocket. In the interior pocket of that same jacket on the same side was something he had carried for 11 years. Not a physical object, an absence. The space where a fact had been that turned out not to be a fact, the space that had been labeled Cole Callahan died 11 years ago, labeled by a voice he had trusted and had no reason not to trust. The label was wrong. He knew that now. The space was not an absence. Cole Callahan was alive and injured and on his way to a federal debrief in Columbus and had a conversation ahead of him with his brother that was going to take more than one sitting and probably more than 1 year. Wade was not sure yet what to do with the reorganization of that interior space. He was not sure what shape it would settle into once the information had been fully processed, which was the kind of processing that took time and could not be rushed. He was not sure whether what he felt was relief or grief or anger or something that did not have a name yet. He was sure of one thing. He was sure that his brother was alive and that he had been wrong to believe otherwise, and that being wrong about something for 11 years was something you set down eventually, not because it was not significant, but because carrying it forever did not serve anything, and you had limited space for carrying, and the space was better used for other things. Like a folded piece of crayon paper with 7 motorcycles and a yellow star. The thing about Gracie Monroe was that she had asked him to keep a promise, and he had kept it, and she had known he would. Not from evidence, not from anything specific he had said or done that warranted trust, but from the specific way he had crouched at the bottom of those steps and looked up instead of down and said, "You okay, kid?" and waited for her to decide. She had decided. She had put her small hand in his, and they had gone through the sliding doors together, and the rest of it had followed. He had been worthy of that trust. Or he had tried to be. He had kept the promise. He had found her mother and brought her back, and the three of them were now in a booth in a diner with the sister from Dayton and a cup of coffee and the particular quality of surviving a long night intact. That was what he would remember. Not the warehouse, not the lake house, not the deputy with the payments, or the judge whose name was now in a federal evidence file. He would remember the hand, small and cold and trusting, and the crackers in aisle 4, and the yellow star above 7 motorcycles. The road opened east, and the machines ran through the last of the dark and the first of the light, and the fog lifted slowly from the fields as the temperature at the horizon began to change the slow, reliable process of morning arriving, regardless of what the night had contained, indifferent to the weight of it, offering the same light it always offered. Enough light, the kind that is enough. The morning after a long night has its own particular texture. Not the morning that arrives with sleep behind it rested in sequential kind that follows an ordinary Tuesday and feels like a continuation of something. The morning that arrives without sleep, that finds you still awake and moving through the world on the specific fuel that burns in a person when ordinary fuel has run out. That morning has a quality of exposure to it, a thinness in the air, and the light that makes everything feel slightly more present than usual, slightly more itself. The way things sometimes do at the edge of exhaustion, when the filters the mind uses to process the world have worn down and the world comes through more directly. Wade Callahan rode east on Route 9 into that kind of morning. He had not slept. He would sleep later in the hours that followed this in a place that was not Carver Falls, Ohio. And the sleep would be the sleep of someone who had been awake for a long time through something that required the full use of everything they had. It would be a complete sleep. A sleep that settled things temporarily, but that was later. Now he was on Route 9 with 37 machines behind him, and the fog still lifting from the fields and the sky at the horizon doing what it always did at this hour, making its slow, reliable case for the return of light. He thought about Cole. Cole would be in a federal facility by 6 in the morning being processed through the documentation that accompanied the end of an undercover operation. He would be debriefed, his cover identity would be formally retired. The 8 months of Cole Briggs would be cataloged and filed and eventually used in federal proceedings against Victor Crane and the judge and the oversight board member and whatever other names emerged from the investigation as it expanded beyond its original boundaries. Cole had said it himself in the diner over bad coffee. The operation was complete, 8 months, and it had taken Wade arriving at a grocery store parking lot to finally close it. There was something in that which Wade had not yet fully examined. The specific coincidence of it. The chain of things that had led from a child on a concrete step to a lake house on Crane Lake Road to a diner at 4 in the morning. If he had not stopped, if Gracie had been sitting on those steps when some other group came through, or no group at all if the sequence had been different in any of its parts. He did not spend much time in the geography of what might have been different. He had learned over the years that this particular territory was not productive to explore in detail. Things were what they were. The night had gone the way it went. Cole was alive and in federal custody, and the investigation was complete. And Rachel Monroe was in a diner with her sister and her daughter, and the debt of $62,000 that had never been legitimate was going to be unwound in federal proceedings. And Gracie Monroe was going to wake up tomorrow in a place that was safe, and her mother was going to be there when she woke up. And that was the thing that mattered most plainly, and most simply the thing underneath all the other things. A 6-year-old had been on those steps for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And then the engines had come, and Wade had stopped. He had stopped, and the rest of it had followed. The formation of 37 machines ran east on Route 9 in the pre-dawn, and the Harmon Square supermarket passed on the left with its cracked parking lot and its half-dead neon sign and its concrete step bare and clean. The H still dark, the S still pulsing its 4-second rhythm, the automatic doors still doing what automatic doors do, opening for the people who came through and closing again behind them. Nobody on the steps. The road continued east toward Columbus, and the morning continued its approach from the east, and the fog continued its slow retreat from the fields, and the formation of 37 machines continued its progress down the center of a 2-lane state highway in Ohio, the engines running in the specific collective register of machines that have been built to cover distance and are covering it, the sounds settling into the pre-dawn air and dispersing and being replaced by the next moment of it. In the interior pocket of Wade Callahan's jacket on the left side against the place where the weight lived, a folded piece of paper made 3 folds thick held its shape. 7 motorcycles in a row. A small figure with a pink jacket and a purple backpack and white shoes. A yellow star above everything, large and certain, and drawn with the hand of someone who had not yet learned to doubt the things they knew. "So you'll remember," she had said. "Yeah," he had said. "So I'll remember." The road opened ahead. The light was coming. The kind of light that did not promise anything specific, that arrived regardless of what the night had contained, that found you where you were and offered itself without conditions. The kind of light that was enough. The Iron Hollow riders rode into it.